Hello and welcome to the Decking Awesome podcast, where we talk about how to create your own board game, our journey through the board game industry, and chat about the board game culture in Ireland. My name is Ciara and I'm joined by the awesome Owen and Brian.
Hi.
Hello.
Today we are talking about Dungeons and Dragons and how we start our own group. We're going to discuss why we find it fun, where to start, and how to run a campaign. So let's start off with what is Dungeons and Dragons?
Dungeons & Dragons, usually just called D&D. It's a tabletop role-playing game where a group of people are pretending to be fantasy characters like dwarves and elves and humans. And then you have one person who's called a dungeon master who kind of sets up these characters to go on kind of crazy adventures.
Kind of like a write-your-own adventure, one of those books you used to read, but, you know, with a lot more monsters. It's brilliant.
Yeah, and that's where the kind of role-playing aspect comes into it. You're just trying to pretend to be elves and druids and all sorts of cool things like that, and then just kind of pretend to be a character.
Okay, so why is it fun?
Well, yeah, the common thread we have in our group when we're playing D&D is the shared storytelling aspect. This is kind of where the players are creating their own story throughout the arc of the adventure. So, you know, they'll come across challenges and they'll have to come up with cool, ingenious ways to
Solve problems.
Yeah, to solve problems.
It's cool that you can basically just do anything you want, or you can try to do anything you want. Like, you come across a monster, you don't always have to shoot it in the face, or you can sometimes try running away, you can sometimes try sneaking around, see if you can tie his shoelaces together when it's not looking.
This
Monsters
is quite hypocritical from somebody who shoots people
Somebody
in the
who
face
just always
so
shoots
often.
people in the face, yeah. My go-to move.
It's hard to explain the fact that you can do anything you want. Until you actually play a game, it's hard to kind of grasp the fact that you can kind of choose however you want to solve a problem, just like you do in reality. You know, if you ever have a problem, you can ask friends for help, or you can come up with some crazy solution yourself, like you can MacGyver a bunch of duct tape together to get your car back up and running.
Yeah, in the real world, don't shoot people in the face.
Yeah, there's a lot more killing in D&D, I suppose. There's laws in the real world.
But it is a great kind of storytelling adventure where you're wandering around through this whole world that's either, you know, partially coming from a book, or whether your dungeon master has made it up entirely himself. It's brilliant. There's so much to it. You could keep going forever with this if it's...
Yeah, it's kind of strange too, because like a book, it's like a story that kind of evolves over time, but the book is written by you, the player, as you play D&D. So it's impossible to tell what the next chapter is going to be about. It's impossible to tell what the next page is going to be about, because you put 4 or 5 different people around a table and they're just going to come up with some crazy different ideas, and you can never predict what they're going to do. Yeah. And it's just great fun just to be part of that experience. Once everyone's open and kind of a collaborative experience, it's really fun.
And also, just like movies and books, like, you really want to know how it ends. You want to know what the climax of the show or book is. So, like, just trying to get through the story is enough to drive you to want to try new things and test it out.
Yeah, and of course, you're talking about a fantasy world here, so you're going to be seeing really cool monsters like that you've never seen before, and kind of going up against them, and you're going to be researching and hearing about strange new races of people, and maybe even conversing with them and visiting like different dimensions and stuff like that, all sorts of weird stuff like that, which you probably can't do in the real world.
And
I'm fairly sure we can talk to other races of people in the real world.
And it's fun from both sides. Like, as a dungeon master, it can be really fun to get to drive the story and to get to adapt to what the group is doing and to try and explain a fantasy world to a group of people, as well as from the player point of view, where, like, getting to travel through and not know what's going to happen and adapt to it. Like, both sides of it are really enjoyable to cover.
Yeah, because as a dungeon master, you're kind of setting up the world. You're kind of setting up the stage for the players to then act and react to the certain situations that have come across. And so the dungeon master doesn't really have a whole lot of control as to what's going to happen, but they kind of can give a lot more resources and kind of show interesting and fun things to the players to see how they react. And that's quite enjoyable as a dungeon master thing to get across, to see people react to your crazy ideas you had.
There's nothing like planning a whole interaction or story or dungeon for a group, and then they just do something completely off the rails, and now you're ad-libbing and just pages and pages of work thrown away.
Yeah, that's happened a lot of times. It's quite fun.
Okay, so where do you start if you're interested in D&D? And where did you guys start?
So I started off by doing a thing called Adventurers League, which is the Wizards of the Coast official kind of way of getting people into the hobby. Usually in like board game cafes or like board game shops, they'll have set up these kind of Dungeons and Dragons nights where you kind of arrive. You can kind of have a chat with the board game shop owners as well beforehand or online. Usually you'll only need like a pencil and paper. Don't worry about dice or characters and like that. And then when you arrive, the DM there will kind of introduce you to a whole bunch of other players, and then might give you your own character or might kind of create a character with you. And then you don't have to worry too much about the rules or what the numbers mean. You don't really have to have any preparation at all. Just dive right in. I remember the first time I played and I had no idea what was going on. What was this? I was just kind of open to the opportunity, check out what was going to happen. And it was great fun. Yeah, definitely enjoyed doing it.
Kind of got more dragged along for the ride with you guys. I just never really played Dungeons and Dragons or done anything like it before, barring board games. But it's really fun. You kind of get engrossed in the story very quickly. So like the first kind of one we really started into was Curse of Strahd. Like we tried once or twice before and never really gotten far. But the Curse of Strahd was the kind of big one that Owen's running there for us now, and it's really good. The way you get into it is just so engrossing.
So I started out in college many years ago, or I joined up to the college board gaming society, and there they did role-playing games as well. So I actually didn't start out in D&D, but in college they just had one-shots for all sorts of different like rule sets, and they just had loads of new players. So it was really fun because like half the people there were just new and willing to just play anything, so it made it really, really easy and really friendly. And like it was college, so everyone was pretty chill and no one was like really competitive or high stress. So I know in Ireland there's a pretty big college board game and role-playing game scene. Yeah, so how hard is it to DM your first campaign? I suppose this is from the Dungeon Master side of things, so anyone thinking about actually leading the story, which doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have had a lot of experience.
Yeah, it's tough. It is tough, but this depends really on the group that you're kind of setting up and you're DMing. For me, it was kind of straightforward. I knew that a lot of the people that I was going to DM with in the group, they were quite close friends. I knew they were going to be very open to this kind of new experience, but I also knew that this is their first time kind of foray into the D&D world. I know you, Ciara, were already quite well known about it, and so I knew that I could rely on you for like rule checking and stuff like that, which is great. But for everybody else, I knew I could improv something and they wouldn't have to worry too much about it. I could just make something up on the spot, and then they wouldn't know what the real rules are, so they wouldn't kind of give out to me. So just try and find some people who are open-minded, willing to try something new, not someone who just like they don't see what they could get out of it, because it's really hard to explain until you actually try and do it. But then, if you have more experienced players who have the rules, just make it clear that, you've got to keep open mind. Don't worry too much about the rules. I'm going to make mistakes as a new DM, but, just we can all work together and make sure it's fun.
Remember, the DM is God, so if any of those experienced players start questioning you, just kill the characters. Put them in their place. Send a message early on.
Players do not like that as much as you might think.
Brian is a cruel DM. So I think that when I was starting out, I was most, I suppose, worried about the improvisation. So I really enjoyed the shorter experiences where I could read all about it, and if I wanted to, I could entirely stick to what the guideline said about the experience. So regardless of the size of the campaign, or just so that I could gather enough information that I could rely heavily on the books if I needed to. I guess what I really wanted to do was tell my own story, but trying to do both on your first session can be a little bit overwhelming. Trying to figure out both your own world and improvising and learning all the rules, or trying to figure them all out, can be quite a lot. So I think I definitely recommend going in for a campaign early on where it's been written for you, so you can kind of get an idea of how hard or easy it is to judge, and getting used to the fact that the players can improvise anything. The joy of D&D is that you could do whatever you want, so you kind of want to have some sort of good structure for yourself to start out with, so you don't feel like totally overwhelmed.
Yeah, because it can be tough when it comes to world building as a DM. The first thing that comes into your mind, especially for Curse of Strahd, when I was trying to think of it, I was trying to think of all the different scenarios and the background of every single character. But I think maybe a better thing to focus on is to worry about every kind of session. So when you have like session 1 and session 2, just think about what your players might enjoy and kind of sprinkle in a few things like that. And then in your session, kind of play that out and then see what people like. It's a little bit tricky for the group that I've created because the friends are all different and they all like different things. So some people will like combat, some people will like storytelling, other people will like loot, and other people will like the world building and the character backgrounds, which is annoying because if everybody liked the one thing, I could just have an entire campaign on that. But instead, it's good that there's kind of a variety as well, because then you can sprinkle in everything else. But I try to focus solely on the sessions, and so I'll have just like a session created, and just try and give that like a combat experience, give it a storytelling experience, and have some player kind of background stuff where their background is revealed to the rest of the characters. And then I'm not going to worry too much about like Strahd and see where he's going with that, because although he's on the front cover in Curse of Strahd, the most important people are the players.
I think if you're planning to DM your first campaign, it's a good idea to have played a few rounds or campaigns or stories yourself, just so you kind of have an idea for how it works, what's expected of you. I mean, you don't have to know the rule book inside and out. You can always Google or flick through the pages as you're going through it. It is a good idea to have played a few times. If you're playing your first campaign or your first one shot, whatever it may be, if you have a dungeon master who's done it a few times before or can guide you through it, it's a great help, because you're not all trying to figure everything out as you go, and everyone can kind of help each other get the hang of it as they go.
Yeah, and like Kira said, the improvising as a DM is such a strong thing to have. It can be a little bit intimidating for new DMs that come in, because improvising is not something that we all know how to do. But I wouldn't worry too much about it. There is some tips and tricks that I use for improvising, and I always go by character motivations. So like, Curse of Strahd, you might have like, this person does a whole lot of things, but that might be derailed when a player does something, and you might be a little bit confused as to what would that person do instead. But if you have just a clear character background or like character motivation of this guy, so like a merchant trying to sell you like goods, and you give him a motivation for like he has a gang of people that are trying to attack him, and he just wants some protection, then it doesn't really matter what your players do. You know what a person in that scenario would do, and then you can just play with that. And then and then you don't really know where that character is going, but just keep going with it. And then between sessions, you might come up with cool ideas for the character and just go, ooh, this character motivation, he could be done by this. And you can change motivations as well, because you're not actually telling your players what his motivation is. Usually, they don't know. Yeah,
and another tip that I would have focused more on was, like, I'm all about the story on these things. And if you think that a campaign or the way players are playing it suits them, but maybe you're not getting to the bottom of the story that you want to tell, feel free to deviate. If you've read some information about a town and maybe there's a historic site there and it's really interesting and you really wanted the players to engage with that, but maybe they didn't want to go there and just had no interest, like the players instead spend 2 hours drinking in a bar with one of the older people from the town. Maybe the older people from the town know about that historic site and they can just, in an engaging two-way dialogue, start talking about it. It's fine to bring in things wherever it suits you to bring them in. Like, try and just remember the bits of the story that stuck with you most, and make sure that you find a way to bring them in whatever the players do, so that they can get as engaged as you were with the story.
And know as well as a DM that the game you like might not be the game that you end up making, because that's a tough one. Because like, I love role playing, and so I have like character motivations is probably the biggest one. Whereas combat's fun, but I'm not huge into it. But the thing is, in a group of a lot of different types of people, as a DM, you want to give people fun, no matter who they are. So if you end up DMing with a lot of people with different kind of tastes than you might have to kind of change your story or change your preparation to kind of match that instead, because whatever the players feel engaged with is the section that they're going to push forward. So if they like combat and they hear there's a giant fire giant in the mountains, they're pretty much just going to make a beeline towards that fire giant and hope for the best.
Going to destroy them.
And that's true even if there's just 2 people in the group and one of them likes role playing and one of them likes combat.
Although to be fair, like at the start of Curse of Strahd, I was all into combat. I just wanted to fight everything, and that was what it was all about. But like as the story's gone on, more things have kind of become gripping, and it's like, oh well, I want to find out more about that. I was like, well, you can go and fight that dragon over there, or you can investigate a bit more over here. I was like, well, I mean, the dragon will still be there. We'll come back to him. I'm gonna find out what's going on over here first. And I know I did anyway. I kind of grew more into the story than just the combat. Like the combat's great fun as well, but trying to figure out what's happening and going around in the background and even working out the politics in the background of some of the towns is brilliant.
Yeah, Blacky, that stuff. As players continue to play D&D, especially with new players, they're going to start to realize more of D&D and realize things that they didn't know that they liked so much. Yeah. You end up having more of a balanced players who kind of know what to expect, and they kind of see the different sections of D&D and what's interesting, and they will tend to come to a more balanced one. But some people just like to, do a load of combat, go into a dungeon and get like cool, like a gold tiara and a magic wand, and they just like that stuff, rather than wide dungeons there.
And how do you think the rules fall into how hard it is to be a DM for a first campaign?
Oh yeah, well the rules that's a tricky one, because like the first time I was a dungeon master for the group, first of all, obviously we created the characters, and then I had them fight a whole bunch of wolves, and I forgot how things hit other things. I forgot that you have to add proficiency as well as your strength modifier or dexterity if you're shooting. I also think I had to look up dexterity for shooting. It was a bit of a mess. But the key is to just don't worry too much about the rules. Kind of create something that usually favors the players. They're more likely to go with it if it favors them a little bit, and just improv something. And then between sessions, you can do rules checks. You can do all sorts of other stuff like that. So we have things like concentration stuff for the wizard. They can't cast 2 concentration spells. These kind of things you might not know about them, but it doesn't matter. Like if the wizard casts 2 concentration spells, it's not game breaking. You can just retcon that later on and just fill in the rule correctly.
And I don't think any players minded. Like between the first 2 sessions, the fact that proficiency came into it, no one really was that bothered at all by it. First of all, in our first session, we were all over the place anyway as players, trying to remember what our backstories were and what we were supposed to be motivated by, and everyone was so focused on themselves that they weren't too worried about like what numbers had to be added. Every time they had to check all the numbers that had to be added together anyway. So I think everyone is new to a story. Even if they've played D&D before, they haven't experienced this story before, so they're pretty willing to adapt to whatever has to happen or whatever rules you want to adjust. I don't think anyone objected, or if they did have some sort of unfair advantage in a session, no one minds being told, oh, actually, you're going to have to adjust that.
Plus, in that first session we played, we were all rolling so many 1s and 2s. It didn't really matter if proficiency was in or not. You trip up over your own feet.
We lost so many axes and swords, dropped things everywhere. It was a mess.
Yeah. The whole point behind the rules is to make sure that players know what they're strong at, what they're weak at. It's not to get in the way of the fun, So if it is getting in the way of the fun, just streamline it.
So, what sort of campaign do you like to start with, or do you think people should start with? And what sort of campaign do you like to start with? So, a one-shot or a full campaign? What's your preferences?
I quite like the one-shots where you can play them through in one session. When I'm DMing anyway, I don't know if I've got the patience yet to sit down and plan out a full story campaign. So I like the one-shots where, it's played out over a couple of hours. You don't have to worry about leveling up characters or anything like that. The players all have pre-generated stats, so it's basically, you can walk them through the story. They can wander off a little bit, and you can get around and get through quick enough and easy enough. It's a great place, well, I found anyway, to start with your first kind of DMing session. That Christmas one shot we ran was great fun, but like we ended up with twice as many people as was planned for it, so I ended up having to go through it all at the start and tweak some of the story and edit the monsters and add in more and change things around, which is brilliant because you have the freedom to follow a story but also to change it up a bit to suit yourself and suit the party, which was great fun.
I had a great time doing that. There's a lot of stuff about homebrew versus Wizard of the Coast official one-shots, or you can find one-shots on DM's Guild, and I think it's a combination of them all, but I do tend to find that there are some very popular one-shots out there, like the one you did, Brian, the Christmas one-shot. That's a really, really popular one, and it's really, really fun to do, and it gives you a template so that you can add on your own stuff that you think people will like. You can add in your own inside jokes between the groups, and you can, if you know that people like certain things, you can add those in as well, and it just allows you to have more control, creativity on the areas you like without worrying too much about the overall plot, because making the whole thing up from scratch is a lot of work. And but I do love one-shots are a really handy way to bring people into D&D straight away. I accidentally did the entire Curse of Strahd because I didn't really know about this one-shot DM's Guild thing. Kind of new to the D&D thing, but Curse of Strahd was by far the most top-rated campaign for Wizards of the Coast, and it is for a first-time DM and first-time players. It is so handy, and it's really easy to just do Curse of Strahd, and people feel engaged, and there is this kind of story, especially because it's not like it's fantasy or you don't need to know about elves and stuff like that. Strahd and vampires are pretty much everywhere in modern day culture, so they know about vampires. They know this guy in a castle in creepy Barovia, which is kind of pretty much just like Transylvania and stuff like that. So people are aware of these kind of myths, and so Curse of Strahd just helps people sit right into that. And there's ghosts and there's werewolves and stuff and zombies and things, so that kind of all that kind of stuff mixes together that you don't actually need to know anything about D&D to really get into Curse of Strahd. So it's kind of perfect.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So I think the first one I ran was a one-shot that I made up that was just set in like a little town, and I had a vague idea of what I wanted to do. I had gotten all the stats and all the plot points, and then I played with a kind of a group that I'd never played with before, and that it went well, but it deviated so far off. I guess I hadn't been used to the ways you kind of lure people into the plot as much. I thought people would just see the plot and then go along with it as it stood. And then I ran the Dragons of Icefire Peak campaign that comes with the Essential Pack. So that's really straightforward. It's so easy to get started on. It's a really good one to start with, because the long running plot, you have free reign of any sort of thing you want to have for the long running plot, and they effectively give you information on one shots that string together into a kind of a long running plot. So that suits really well. Okay, you have to kind of go through 6 one shots before your first session, because the players can go any different way through those first 6. But I think I much prefer though the character development you can have in the campaigns. So I think that even though Dragons of Icefire Peak was a lot of one shots, the fact that you could character develop across them really made a difference. You got used to the people's background and people got a chance to explore that. In a one shot, you're more focused on the story. I think I prefer when you're more focused on your character development. So I think I prefer the campaigns myself, even if it is just a selection of one shots strung together.
Yeah, that player development doesn't really happen in one-shots. During the Christmas one-shot, it was really fun being a barbarian.
Yeah, you don't really relate to it. They were auto-generated names. They were not easy to to pronounce. I think it just threw us a load of Scrabble tiles at a board and went, that'll do.
But it was fun to pretend to be that kind of character.
A barbarian obsessed with carrots, feeding reindeer as he travels,
looting dead snowmen
for their carroty noses.
It was fun.
It was fun. That was as little character development as was in that. You tried to infuse your own spin on it, which made it more interesting.
I suppose you're not really relating to a character or growing with the character for the very short ones as you would with even the likes of Dragon Icefire or Curse of Strahd.
I think you bringing up a good point of Essentials kit though. That is a really good box. There's also the Starters kit from Wizards of the Coast. They're both very similar. Essentials kit I find is a little bit better.
You can have smaller group numbers as well. So I think that is the first one I've ever run, and it was just Brian and Owner, the 2 people playing it. So that's the smallest group.
Yeah, they have this thing called sidekicks, and that they kind of attach to the rest of the party to beef it up.
And it's good if you don't have as big a group, because it can be hard to find people to play with you. I guess that's probably a good topic to cover, is how do you create a group, and how do you decide on who gets to be part of that group, or, well, not like it's an exclusive club, but how do you pick out people who you think will get involved?
I love Adventures League for Wizards of the Coast. However, it's 5 random people and a DM, and the DM is usually a really nice person. He's DM'd for a long time. The problem with the 5 people is you can just have one person who can kind of slightly ruin things. They kind of mention offensive things, or they could say the wrong thing, or they're very selfish, or etc. And that's kind of like a bit of a problem, because one person can ruin the rest of the game for everybody. So we find that creating the groups yourself and finding those people, you don't have to be really close friends. They can be anybody, because you will get closer to these friends as possible. You can have work colleagues. You can get people in like a board game group. They don't need to know so much about fantasy and role playing. It's more that they're open-minded. They're willing to kind of get together and work as a team to have fun, rather than being a combative kind of everyone against each other. Everyone's trying to get the DM's attention, that kind of stuff. That can be quite detrimental and kind of hazardous. As a DM anyway, you want to give every player enough time to speak, enough time to interact and react to the story, and that gives everybody a voice that they all get throughout their campaign, and it gives them a chance for their players to develop, for them to develop the story in their way, and to kind of react in different ways. Those are all very important things. Yeah.
And it can be hard as a DM, as much as you want everyone to talk. If you do have one personality that's kind of overwhelming, like when you're starting out as a DM, it's better off to try and not have a situation where you have that very strong personality in the group, because it can be very hard to get past them and bring out the essence of the other people in the group. I guess the new rules, the sidekicks in D&D, helps because you can have a much smaller group, so you could have 2 or 3 people, and you can have a pretty good shot at a complicated campaign. When you have somebody in a big group, they can overwhelm the group, even if it's like 5 or 6 people.
Yeah, and it's totally unconscious. It doesn't have to be something kind of obvious. It's very hard to pick it out. It could just be the fact that like someone is just sitting closer to the DM, that you're interacting more. Person's sitting further away on the table, they might not be as engaged in the plot as well. So it's a little bit tricky. That's more of a DM problem to kind of figure out. But sometimes it's a lost cause. If they're aware of it and they're doing it, and they're doing it on purpose to take control, then it can ruin it, because it only takes 1 or 2 sessions in a row to be ruined. For you to just decide never to go.
Have a wizard curse them with silence, so their character isn't allowed to talk for a couple of sessions. They have to sign language everything. Give other characters a chance to
well, this is
through.
This is the thing about Dungeons and Dragons as well. It's a very social game. So if you do end up having these kind of issues with your players, and they are like your close friends, you're always probably just going to have to take them aside afterwards, kind of to speak to them privately, maybe like direct message or whatever, and just go through these issues that you're saying and we're starting to see this a lot. You're taking over a little bit too much, and then kind of bring that up, and then just see what happens. And
another thing is, if you're doing one shots, don't be put off if you want to do them at conventions and things. For a one shot, usually at conventions the DMs have a lot of experience, so they can kind of be good at reducing the effect of an overwhelming personality, and they can kind of balance it and make sure to listen to other people. So when you're playing with friends, try and balance the group, especially if it's a campaign. But if you're only playing a one shot, like a few hours, if it doesn't go that well, it's not that bad. Don't be put off by it and give it a go. Like for years I played only at conventions, and I had a really great time. But yeah, sometimes the sessions were like one person was obsessed with what was happening to their character and didn't want you to talk or try and do any actions that weren't just copying whatever they were doing. But they were few and far between. I'd say I had a lot more good sessions than bad sessions. So just don't be put off if it happens once to you. It might just be once off.
Yeah, that's a good point though. RPG conventions are a very good way of getting into it, because they're usually one shots, and you get a selection of like 10. It's like a menu from like a wine thing, and you can choose whatever kind of flavor suits you. So we quite like doing that whenever we go to RPG conventions. There's loads of RPG conventions, probably right next to where you are. So all over Ireland, all over the entire world, very popular. So definitely check out the next one that's on. Head over and then just join one or two. They don't take that long, and it'll get you a good feeling. And you don't have to have any preparation done at all.
Yeah.
No, you can just turn up, and the DM usually has enough dice for everyone, so you don't have to worry about any of it.
And I'd say even if you're worried about participating, you've never been involved in it at all, if you went along to one of these conventions and just had a chat with one of the dungeon masters and asked, look, do you mind if I sit in and watch? I'm sure they'd have no issue with you sitting there beside them at the table and kind of getting a feel for how everything works and how everything goes.
Okay, so what are our favourite bits of a D&D session? And what is the best way to break the ice and get the banter going?
Giant box of donuts.
That was very useful on the last session.
There's always just a pile of food on the table. That's always a good way to, can I steal some of your Maltesers? Yeah, okay, yeah. My donuts? Yeah, no, work away.
Maltesers are probably the rarest commodity. As in, everyone wants them, and an entire full box can be gone in about 4 seconds. Yeah. They are very sought after.
You feel bad for that person who tried to be nice and brought some grapes or something, and the grapes are still sitting there at the end.
When we run out of chocolate, we tend to go for we'll accept fruit and
what's left.
We did try and start healthy this year.
Yeah.
We got carrots and things, and that lasted a while, but then sweets came out.
I don't know. I think if you're playing a game and you have one person or one character who's not getting involved that much, the DM doesn't even have to be the one to do it. You can have one of the other players, go, oh, what do you think we should do? Kind of drag them along, get their character to do a bit more. Like if their character is particularly dexterous or is very charismatic or very strong, when you get kind of checks that require strength or dexterity or smoozing your way into a party or something like that, suggest that they be the ones to go up and try it rather than just let them sit back and watch, because then at least they're getting a bit involved and maybe they'll be the one to suggest it next time.
That never seems to happen in the Curse of Strahd campaign. It always seems to be the lowest charisma person who comes up with a crazy charismatic idea.
I literally have negative charisma, and it always seems to be me just trying to go, hey, why don't you just turn and walk away?
Yeah. Never works out that well.
You rolled -2.
But yeah, no, my favourite bit is definitely the dialogue. As a DM anyway, I especially enjoy either watching the players converse between themselves about what to do, like some of their crazy plans, but maybe they're also conversing about their backstory and learning some stuff about their roots. Or if I'm just a weird merchant who doesn't want to sell them anything, and then someone like the group is trying to convince me that I need to sell them like a splint mail or something like that, and I just don't want to. It's just those kind of conversations are great. Until they lead to violence. They always lead to violence. But,
I one of the characters who shall remain nameless threatened to burn the shop down.
Yeah, got a bit out of control.
That person was ushered out by the other.
I like the interaction with other players, and if you come up against something unusual or something difficult, like I love when, if I'm a magic person or I'm a druid in the Curse of Strahd, being able to use one of the weirder druid spells, or maybe with the paladin trying to come up with a cunning plan that's maybe terrible and trying to somehow convince the DM that this is going to work. He doesn't really get it, but it's definitely a logical thing that's going to happen.
It just brings me to the time the wizard and the fighter walked backwards into a cave because they thought the large something in there was causing everyone to be turned to stone by looking at them, so they went backwards in it, which is great. Yeah. They did. It turns out there was a giant thing in there. Turned people to stone.
Yeah, that's sort of like bouncing off each other. It's not often actually that the wizard and the fighter they're usually not beside each other or anything like that. And then they were just like, they got a chance to chat and decided that this was definitely the best plan.
I love that. I have to think I really love the variability of us. Like, I remember one of the first times that we met Strahd when he was raiding the town, and at one point, one person was invisible riding on top of a 12-foot spider. One person was outside having just shot someone's kneecaps trying to interrogate them for information, while someone else was hiding down the back of a church hoping not to be seen. There was just, we split the party. We shouldn't have split the party.
I was the spider.
Yeah, that's because you can't get that in a lot of other things. That whole like 6 people doing totally different things, but all kind of like having a semblance of we're a group kind of thing. We got a little bit of a plan going on. Very cool.
I'm trying to figure out what other people are going to do on their turn. I was getting closer and closer to something, and I was like, okay, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do when I get up to the place, and having the other people like have their own opposite plan coming from the other side, and then trying to figure out how it's all going to join up, and having a little bit of chaos, but at the same time a little bit of direction on what you kind of in your head hope this ends out like.
Yeah, you guys aren't fighting really with the DM at all or with the story. The players are kind of picking what they expect to happen, which is great as a DM, because you want the players to feel like they can do anything they want, and I'll make a fair judgment on it.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely incredible. I also, it's really fun to see which NPCs the characters kind of connect with as well. So like, there's lots of different NPCs that you guys have been seeing, but like, you know, the one that they all seem to love is Lancelot, which is a dog. It's a dog. They found a dog under a piano once, and they just couldn't. They have been attached to that dog since, and it recently is staying with a witch or a hag at the moment, and everyone's worried about it. I think they're more worried about the dog than Strad.
We love that dog. If something happens to that dog, Owen, we're going to put you down in real life. It's not... He better be okay. Anyway, yeah. Yeah, so...
I'll make a fair judgment.
And I'm just saying, we all know where you live.
I'm just saying, apart from any of us, I feel like we could single out one person who's coming after you if that dog gets hurt. Maybe a wielder of dual axes.
I always find it quite cool because as a DM, I'm pretty terrible at coming up with voices or coming up with like backstories a whole lot of time. A lot of my NPCs tend to merge into the same person, just wearing a different hat. For some reason, I'll try and do like Brovian, like Romanian accents, or like kind of dark, mysterious ones. It always ends up as a Texas person.
Always.
Good old Texas in the middle of Romania.
It's just for some reason they all sync back to Texas.
Also, it's a dead giveaway if Owen can't remember the name of the NPC. Then we know he's not important anyway. If we say in the next session, oh, and you remember that guy did this, and Owen is like, I don't know who you're talking about. You're like, okay, we're all going to forget that information too now. Okay, so in a campaign, unlike a one-shot, there is a session 0 at the start of it. And this can be a pretty important part of setting the tone and how the campaign is going to run. So what are some tips for running a session 0 session?
So the session 0 is a great session to have, especially when it comes to the big campaign. And it kind of does lead the way to the rest of your sessions. The first thing you're obviously going to want to do as a dungeon master is explain the world and like what kind of campaign the players are going to be part of. And this could be including like what kind of teams they don't want in their campaign, like torture or sex. And this is kind of where people will bring these things up and kind of discuss them and see what they're kind of comfortable with. And then that gives you a good gauge as to what to go towards. But it's also a place where the players will create their characters, especially for new D&D players. They might not really understand how important this bit is, because you'd be surprised how quickly they get attached to their characters. You know, after 3 or 4 sessions, if they see this character die, they might as well die themselves a lot of times. So at the time, at session 0, they won't really understand the significance of it. So help them along with kind of keeping a balanced character, keeping a balanced party, but also giving them kind of backstory and cool little ideas that will help them link into the whole campaign. I came up with a couple of cool backstory things. I gave people a few options, but I also told them that it's totally open. They can pick whatever they want. And so a few people have like different aspects of their personality and stuff like that, and different things that happen in their history that kind of links in with the story. And other people will love this, some aspects more. So like you will have the people who are stats heavy, and they will want to make sure that their stats are the best, and they have their best starting equipment. And you have other people who don't really care about their stats and just care about what's my back history, my backstory, who am I, and where did I come from, you know? And these are all very important to kind of bring in and kind of show off to people.
So I really loved coming up with my backstory. Even if I do not share it with anyone and absolutely don't talk about it for the entire campaign, I will spend a good amount of time, if no matter what I am, if I'm a sorceress halfling, I would spend time trying to figure out why on earth a halfling would have become a sorceress in the context of the story. I think that one of the things that facilitates that is having a DM that's going to give you any hooks that they can. So you need something so your character doesn't feel like it's just like a random selection of characters. It's different from a one-shot where the characters are predefined and either they're part of a story or what type of characters they are doesn't really matter. Because really in a one-shot it's just about this, it's more focused on the story. Having this extra bit to add on to a campaign means that you can figure it out in your head how you're going to play the character or how you want to play the character. Like, some people want to just focus on one random aspect of the character, which is great, but if that's what they do when they're role playing, they need to figure out what that one aspect for this new character will be. And like, I think in this one, it's a really good way to like get to know the DM as well. If you're a player, and how do you get along with that person and what the DM is looking for in the game. So like, it makes it a lot easier if the DM makes sure to like talk to each individual person just a little bit about their own character individually. I think that really makes the difference, because then as a player you just feel a little bit more comfortable and you feel like you can really invest in the character that you're trying to build.
Yeah, that's true. I suppose if you've got the backstory for the character, you want them to succeed, you want them to stay alive. Whereas if you just take a generically generated one, if he dies 1 or 2 sessions in, you're like, oh well, I'll just generate another one. Yeah. But as you said, players get really attached to their characters after a while, and you don't want to see them die, and you're begging people to help you up off the ground after you've been knocked out.
But I shouldn't, like, it's your first D&D session, you can definitely create a pre-generated character and not worry too much about it, because a DM can, like in session 3 or 4, you can revisit the topic, which I've done that a couple of times with different players, and then added more to their backstory. And so you can just kind of always be improving it and kind of always be adding more to it and just kind of layering it on and on and on. Or you can come up with it all at the very start and then kind of link it in. But no matter what happens, your character is going to develop with the story. Your character is going to have decisions to make, and you're going to have actions to choose from, and then that's going to develop that character. So like, we have a wizard who likes to steal things, which isn't exactly like,
she's very open about it.
Said wizard listening to this podcast.
But I find that the alignment as well, like, you know, lawful good, neutral evil, I think that's kind of pointless, because it doesn't really matter what that person puts down there. They are already going to pick that character. They're going to choose how to play their character already. Yeah. I would always go neutral good, because first of all, no matter who is playing D&D, they don't care about the law, but they don't want to be chaotic either. So they're somewhere in the middle. And then everyone's good, because you should only have good players who are like nice people. So yeah.
I don't know if you could class a lot of our group as neutral good.
Oh no, I wouldn't.
Yeah, no.
I thought they were.
We downgraded a lot of them.
I thought they were.
I went chaotic good at the start, but I feel like I deserved a bit of a downgrade after threatening that child with a crossbow.
I could not agree more.
I was trying to get the demon out of him.
Sure.
And then I was just trying to get information out. You know, I went too far.
There's a lot of players have made a lot of weird decisions. Like, but if we were doing an alignment-based system, I would be telling them to go like, yeah, you know how you're good? Yeah, you're not really good anymore. You remember that thing you did with that old woman? You're evil.
To be fair, our paladin is really sticking to it. Our paladin has gone good.
Yeah.
And I think that that's more like driven from the backstories.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I've done some questionable things as a character. To be fair, the group has accepted me regardless, but I feel like our group is made up of some very questionable individuals, so people can forgive the sins of other people.
But this is one of the reasons I love pre-generated campaigns like Curse of Strahd, because it doesn't really matter what you guys kind of backstories you come up with. There's always a way for you guys to link it into this main story. But also there is cool ways of like searching online, because there's a lot of people out there have done these kind of one-shots on like some person's weird backstory, and you can use that to kind of insert into your own campaign.
And I suppose maybe just to know, if you are picking a campaign, the ones that have been out longer are the ones that have more like advice from other DMs. When something comes out first, it can be quite hard to get extra information on how to add things in and stuff like that. What you want in an ideal world is to play a campaign where there are experienced DMs who've played it, and there's like loads of people on YouTube who are very happy to give tips and hints on how to like round out certain sessions or ones where there's a little bit of choppiness in the story. They have put a lot of work into how they would do it, and when it's an experienced DM, you can really feel the flow better in the storyline.
Yeah, I can't remember the specific person, but for Curse of Strahd, there's a person called DM's Carter who is on Reddit, who has a full kind of every single place explanation and cool things you can add into every session. And there's also the Elven Guide on DM's Guild, which is really, really handy for kind of going through and summarizing, but also adding cool new elements to it and kind of giving the characters more motivation for all these weird NPCs you might see around the place. And like I've added in lots of things, like Vallaki is a big one. I've added in maybe 12 or 13 different locations that weren't in the story. And that was because of just cool things that people came up with and then just put it up on Reddit and put it up online. Like there's a whole lot of other things, like there's the prison kind of thing. All right, I won't mention anything. All right, come on.
He's always trying to share.
Always trying to give away.
I'm just going to call it out, don't worry.
You don't have to cut it out, just, yeah. Stop talking sometimes.
But I want to share.
Yeah, so maybe the downfall of the DM is another thing as well. The only disadvantage of being a DM is the amount of things that you cannot share.
Yeah.
Like, you can't share upcoming information, stuff that you've worked on really hard for, like, you've been thinking about for like 2 weeks of how you're going to do something, and then it doesn't work out the way you wanted it, and then you had to improvise something, and then something else happened, and you're like, all you want to do is share all of that information with the players, but you can't.
That's
and
tough.
it can be really lonely for that bit of like not getting to tell everyone how cool the stuff was, that or how much effort you put into some random piece that they pretty much breeze by in 5 minutes.
Yeah, because there's a lot of... I can't wait for you guys to finish Curse of Strahd. There's so many things I want to tell you guys. Another thing is the World Anvil. There's a website online that we use for managing the articles and kind of the sessions as they go through. And I think that's a very kind of handy thing to have, because it allows players to go back to like session 5 or whatever and see kind of interesting things that like, or foreshadowing or whatever, and they can see that kind of go on further in. And we also have like maps of Barovia, and so it'll tell you kind of whereabouts things are and what you guys have seen, where have you gone, and NPCs you've met. It gives it kind of a collaborative space for all the players to kind of get together so that no one's left in the dark. Because a lot of players don't use pen and paper to kind of jot down the NPC's name, whatever, and so you don't have to worry about that with this.
6 other people around the table writing it down. I don't see why I have to as well.
I think the World Anvil, the session recaps for such a long campaign, they are so important.
Very handy,
like,
yeah.
The amount of times I've gone back to the early sessions to go, what was that thing? I remember vaguely like a guy saying a thing. What was that thing? And that happens all the time. Or like, oh, was that guy a good guy or a guy in a dream or a real person? I don't even remember. But I remember he said something that was important about a bird. I know it can be hard to remember, and to be fair, Owen puts in a lot of work as a DM to actually write that stuff down, or what was important in a session, because often our notes focus on like some sort of random engraving we saw that had no relevance whatsoever. But that's pretty good. Okay, so now you've got your characters together, your DM has given you a bit of the storyline or how you got to where you started. How do you run session 1?
Yeah, so I have a kind of the same formula I always go with sessions, and it's just to try and get as much fun as possible, because that's really what D&D is about, trying to get as much fun as possible per session.
You have to divide up the fun.
Fun per time.
One per time quota is met. What I tend to do, I start off the session with a quick recap of the last one. I used to do it myself. I now get one of the players to do it, and that kind of just shows me at least which ones they found most interesting. So it gives them an idea of going, all right, well, I thought the combat we did this cool and we fought this dragon, whatever. Then I'm like, cool. They really enjoyed the combat, but they didn't actually care at all about this strange purple obelisk. You know?
Got smashed down.
We shall.
It could be important.
One of the things that I like about the sessions that we run in Curse of Strahd is that there is a bit of combat and a bit of role playing. So everyone gets a chance to do a bit that they like. even if it's just a small combat with like a random wolf that walk by, then the players who want a little bit of that action or to utilize all those stats that they spent hours building up, that they get a chance to do it. And then for the role-playing side of things, that you've got to either develop your character further, or you've gotten a little bit more information on the overall plot, or you've had to dig into something, you've got to do some investigation, something like that. So I think that each session should have some sort of focal point or some sort of achievement point. And ideally, so I know some groups really, really like to storytell, and maybe they focus entirely on storytelling. And I guess it's about making sure that in each session, if that's what the group want, that there is some sort of development in the plot. We didn't just spend 3 hours walking through a woods between one town and another, fought one group of wolves and nothing else happened. Even if it's just a character revelation, maybe that's it, that's all that needs to happen. Maybe they see a tree that reminds them of their home in that session, and then that starts the conversation. Well, that's great, but make sure that if something isn't happening, that you can force some sort of plot point on everyone so they feel like they've gotten further along in the story each time.
I think I totally agree with that. There's so many different elements to a good session that it makes it hard to kind of balance it as well. So like I said, some people love the fact that they've gone from like one point in Brovia like all the way across to the west, and that gives a sense of completion. But they also know there's loads of other cool things to explore, and what is in Brovia, and they're kind of exploring around. That's really fun for some people. Or some other people kind of look at Strahd and they're like, what is Strahd about? I need to know more about the Strahd guy, and they focus on that, and that's kind of cool as well. And you know, players will kind of push their own agenda and get through it, but they also need you as a DM to kind of give them those opportunities to kind of get it. And then other people, they don't mind too much about Barovia or Strahd. They want to get like a cool looking sword, a backpack, and they want to get like a little backpack for their dog. And they want to have all the trinkets and the cool things and the rings and the hats and stuff to make their character look badass as possible.
We had to get that saddle for the dog. The druid just was not keeping pace.
I was keeping pace when I was a bear. Okay.
Yeah, so I think those are all things that people kind of enjoy. Some people, like, obviously you have to keep them light and kind of quick, so that if you don't like them, that people still enjoy doing them. So like, you'll still have things like combat. Some people love combat, and then other people don't like doing the combat in the thing, especially when it drags on for so long. So you need to make sure, but it's also hard as a DM because you never know how long these combats are going to last. So just keep throwing things different at them. Try and keep everything fresh and new. Like if you send a bunch of wolves at someone, if you want to send another bunch of wolves at them, there's got to be something different about those wolves, or it has to be more. There has to be a big guy, you know. It has to always keep it fresh. But yeah, our sessions tend to be quite short. They're usually weekdays, so it's like 2 or 3 hours. So we tend to have to keep them snappy. But then every now and then we get like a weekend session where we can have like a good in-depth kind of conversations, and no one's rushed, and there's lots of different opportunity, and we can kind of get through a lot more.
And like, I also enjoy about a good session, if you do think of something clever, it's nice if the DM lets you pursue that clever thing or try and get to the bottom of it. If you suddenly think, oh yeah, this is something to do, this could be something to do with my backstory, I'm going to do this random action that will seem random to other people, but like, I feel like it's part of my character backstory, and it's nice when the DM gets it, or the DM like says, okay, you can do that, sure, whatever you're trying to do doesn't really fit into any of the skills per se that your character has, but I'm going to give you that. I'm going to let you like try something different.
Yeah, this reminds me heavily of the time that the group first met a werewolf, and the fighter decided that they were going to grapple the werewolf to the ground, tie it up, and then question it in the middle of the combat. Yeah. And I had to come up with a whole bunch of like rolls. And I was like, all right, let's do like strength contested roll. I'm sure the werewolf will get out of it. He's got like a +5 strength. The fighter's only got like +2 or +3. But I just wrapped him up in a bow.
And you made it like a load of strength checks. It wasn't even, it was like there was a whole bunch one after the other for like each arm and each leg.
There was a tackle, a hold down, a tie down, stop them getting out.
The werewolf had to try and get out.
Yeah.
And that's where our fighter used up all of her good rolls.
As a DM, there's lots of things you have to prepare for when you're doing your sessions, which are very important. Obviously, there's NPC names, which I have prepared, but I never check. And it always ends up my names are like Joe and stuff like that. Terrible. But yeah, I have those at hand, but I tend to also come up with a list of random combat encounters. So I only have like 3 or 4. Usually they're kind of linked into the player characters in some way, but also gives you kind of loot at the end. And I also have like a list of magic items or kind of loot you can get. And this doesn't really have to do with any of the random counters, but you want to give them something afterwards. But you never know, like there might be a traveling merchant and he might be selling some cool stuff. So just have just the magic items as a separate list, because these magic items obviously are based on what levels the characters are and what they kind of expect to get at that point. And then another one is to have clues. So you'd want to have a bunch of clues based on the story, the overall story. So like, you know, Curse Strategy, I tend to have 10 clues, and I don't know who is going to tell the party the clues or how they're going to find out. They could have it scrawled on a rock on the side of a road, or it could be like, I don't know, a dude just in a bush yelling it.
Don't look in the bush.
You never really know where the sessions are going to go. You don't know what they're going to do or where they're going to go. So just have the set clues, and then just if they do something cool, or if they meet some person, or they save a kid's life or whatever, he might know some cool stuff. So yeah, those things really help a lot, because then you don't have to worry too much about, you know, like giving your players cool things, because you'll have a list of things ready.
Yeah, and I think as a player, when you roll a 20 on a perception check in a woods, and really you are just trying to find like some really obvious animal tracks, and then you get something extra because you rolled a 20, or maybe you see a clue, or they left behind an extra scrap of something that's related to the plot, you kind of feel good. So like when you roll a 20, you kind of want to get like some little extra, even if it's outside of combat. And like, sure, in combat there's a whole set of rules that makes you feel good about the whole thing, but outside of combat you want just kind of a little bit of a nice thing to make you feel like, oh yeah, I contributed to the party's development of the plot.
Yes, it reminds me of the time the ranger and the wizard were trying to follow tracks, and they both rolled natural ones, and they found a wolf trap over each foot. That's because I had a couple of traps just prepared already, and I knew exactly what would be there.
I forgot I should have had advantage on that.
Okay, so I think that about wraps it up for getting started with Dungeons and Dragons. If you want to share your memories or experience of D&D, or just want to chat, feel free to comment down below. We've been Decking Awesome Games. Find us on social media. Thanks for listening, and see ya.
Bye.
Cheers.